The CAC is a little different from some of the other programming in this building. We're an academic conference that takes place at the heart of the conference. We're here every day from 10:30 to 3:30. If you'd like to see CAC-specific programming information, we have programs that look like this on a table in the back. There's also flyers for various journals and books and whatnot back there too. If you are interested in getting involved with the CAC, if you want to present in the future, we've also got in the program a call for papers. That gives you information for where you can send proposals for panels or for presentations. There are CAC-specific shirts on sale at the Comic-Con merch. I think that's what it's called now. This year's shirts, I'm wearing one. The front is the CAC logo, and the back says, "I'm a scholar, ask me how." And I think that's about all I have for you today. This is our last panel of the day, but we'll be here again tomorrow at 10 a.m. And so Travis can take us away and ask you the question of who created Batman.
What was that? Okay. I don't know, Max. How do I make this video pleasant?
It's space.
Space?
When I was a poor kid from Bronx, New York, and I was only earning about $20–25 a week doing film and cartoons. So one day I went over to the editor, Vince Sullivan, and I said, "Hey, would you like to take on another super duper character?" And he said, "Sure, we're doing great with Superman, can you come up with something?" I said, "For $1,500 a week, I can come up with anything, believe me." And I want to make my character different, another copycat character, Superman. I had three major influences on my creation of Batman. One was Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine. I saw a book of inventions by Leonardo da Vinci when I was 12 years old or so. And he had the first flying machine 500 years ago was a man on a sled with huge bat wings. And Da Vinci had quotes. And as I recall, the quote said, "Remember that your birth will have no other model but that of a bat." There it was. And Senator Fairfax Sr. was a swashbuckling hero of silent film. And he did a movie called The Monte Zorro. And he wore kind of a stocking mask with slits for the eyes. He put on a sword to his side, and he had a black horse Raven, which exited from the cave at the side of his mansion. And lo and behold, years later, said of things to come, that's where I got the idea for the bat cave coming out of the Wayne Manor and the Batmobile and so forth. The third one was a movie called Bat by Mary Robert Reinhardt, the mystery writer. And the bat in that film was a villain, but he wore a weird bat costume. Those were my three major influences on my creation of Batman. So that weekend I created a character with stiff bat wings behind him, brought it in on Monday, and I said, "There it is, the Batman." And Vince Sullivan liked it and bought it immediately as the second superhero for DC Comics. And as they say, it became history after that. And then I created Robin a year later in the image of a boy wonder, visualizing that old boys his age, 13, 14, would visualize themselves fighting crime alongside Batman, a superhero. We needed a villain, and I used to play practical jokes on my friends as kids. So I thought of, and I used to play cards a lot when I was a youngster, and I remember the joke of playing cards. Pretty hard to realize that I created Batman 50 years ago. It seems like only yesterday. The old cliche, but it's true. I was 18 years old, and I don't feel much older today than 18. And as I look at my characters in the drawing board, Batman and Robin, Catwoman, and Penguin, and the Joker, it seems like I just created them a day ago.
The sound on that was so much better on my PC. All right. That answers the question, right? We need to have welcome to our discussion of who created Batman. I am Dr. Travis Langley, a professor of psychology and author of Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night. I have a wonderful panel, which I know it's too many people, but the topic is too big and everybody has bits and pieces. So we're going to start from this end, let you introduce yourself, and why in the world you ought to be up here.
I'm Nicky Wheeler-Nicholson. My grandfather founded basically the modern comic book industry with New Fun and Big Fun, and then went on to start DC Comics, and I've been researching his life and the history of his work for the last 15 years. And Gerard Jones and I are coming out with a book next year.
I'm Marc Tyler Nobleman. I am the author of a book called Bill the Boy Wonder, the secret co-creator of Batman. In fact, yesterday when a non-attending friends heard that I was doing a panel called Who Created Batman, he said, I assume you're just going to get up there, take the mic, say Bill Finger, drop it, and walk out.
I think I agree with those sentiments, but my name is Tom Andrae, and I was a co-author of Bob Kane's autobiography, Batman and Me, and created the superheroes with a bunch of interviews with Stephen Schuster, Bob Kane, Jerry Robinson, and Bill Finger interviews, plus other people.
Hi, my name is Arlen Schumer. I'm a comic book historian and illustrator. 15 years ago, in 1999, I did a cover story for the trade magazine Alter Ego special Batman issue, and I recreated the first sketch that Bob Kane showed to Bill Finger when he was creating Batman, and I tried to recreate that sketch, which has never been published or seen, about what that might have looked like before Bill Finger basically added all of the additions that made Batman into the character that we know today. And I'll be lecturing tomorrow on art and comic art, and I did a book called The Celebrated Comic Art, and there's some flyers in the back. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is James Robinson. I'm the president of CartoonArts International. We represent cartoonists from around the world, political and humor. But the reason I've been invited to this panel is because of my father, who is Jerry Robinson, who was in the who was on part of the original Batman team, and was working closely with Bill and Bob, and he came along just after Batman had begun. And he was such a strong supporter of proper credit for Bill Finger, and was instrumental in creating the Bill Finger Award here at Comic-Con.
Hi, my name is Athena Finger. I'm the granddaughter of Bill Finger. I'm really honored to be here this year to help celebrate the wonderful character of Batman and the people behind it.
Hi, I'm Denny O'Neil. I wrote my first Batman story in May '68, and my last one last year, and I edited the Batman franchise for 15 years.
I'm Brad Ricca, and I have the best seat in the house next to Denny O'Neil. Actually, I wrote the book Superboys, which is the biography of Stephen Schuster, who created Superman. So naturally, I belong on Batman. But I think I'll be here maybe to at some point ask the question of maybe we're asking the wrong question.
Hey, but that's Superman, there would have been no Batman.
Exactly.
A lot of people have shaped the mythos over the course of the years. Many people have contributed in many ways, contributed many bits and pieces. You go to the creator credit, you go back to the very beginning, and there are different creators on different bits and pieces, obviously, especially in that first year or two. When things are popping along like the Bat plane, even before that car gets named, the Batmobile. At the very beginning, before Bob Kane ever even signed his first contract with National to produce these stories, what happened? We've got many different elements that are going on. We've got the influences, we've got that conversation he talks about having with Vince Sullivan, and over the weekend coming back with his super duper character, and I'm worried about diffusion of responsibility with this many panelists. Asking you, the panelists, because this could take a bit, before Bob signed the contract, Where did this character come from?
I'll take a stab at that.
Well, I spent an evening with Bill and knew him a little bit, and I don't think it's any secret, because he is on record in many places as saying his primary inspiration was Walter Gibson's Shadow. And as Mr. Kane said on the screen, there was that Mary Roberts Reinhardt movie, The Bat, which is pretty good. It stars Chester Morris. And it was actually a pulp character called The Bat. And the inspiration for the first Cases of Chemical Syndicate, Tony Tal, is Tony in the audience? No. He did some magnificent research, and he found the Shadow novel, which directly inspired that story. It was not one of Walter Gibson's. It was written by Theodore Tinsdale. And so Batman was not created so much as assembled, and that sounds like a put down, and it's not. Nothing is original. It is never the ingredient. It is the recipe. There is a wonderful book by Jonathan Lethem called The Ecstasy of Influence, which demonstrates with classy prose and good reasoning that there is absolutely nothing that hasn't been done before. But the question is how you're going to do it. And Bill Finger understood comic books before anybody, almost. And the silhouette, the bat silhouette, I've known a lot of artists who didn't want to do Batman monthly, but they sure wanted to draw that Batman once to show the world their Batman. He understood the visual elements, he understood the gothic elements. As far as I'm concerned, he created the Batman, and after the Case of the Chemical Syndicate, he did a lot of stories that were, in fact, more originally plotted.
Tom, you had a thought?
At this point in history, the Depression was going on, and America was starting to segue into a world war, and there was also Prohibition before then, and you get all these Bat characters in the early 30s. There's a whole bunch of them, the Black Bat and Black Bat mystery stories. Didn't have a costume, but he left the card with a Black Bat insignia on it. There was a character called The Bat in 1934, had a sackcloth hood with eye slits and a bat insignia. There is a character called The Batman, who is the enemy of the Spider, 1935. There's even a Mickey Mouse cereal with the Bat, often called the Bat Bandit, 1935. Kane was a self-described copyist, and he copied Gottfridson's Mickey Mouse all the time. So there's all these Bat influences, and Bob told me that, of course, one of the major influences was Dracula, that he based the look of Batman on. So all these Bat characters, I think America was sort of looking for an anti-hero to some extent because of all the institutional dysfunctionality that was going on, the hard times and the fears that were generated. He came based on all these influences. By the way, it wasn't the Bat that Bob said inspired. He always got it wrong. I pinned him down on this. He said it was the Bat Whispers, which was 1930. The Bat was a silent film. Although I do think that both those films probably were influential. We can talk more about how that film became incarnated into the Batman text, for example, and some of the stories. That actual film, the plot of it.
I'd like to add that the other incentive for Bob Kane to create Batman was the money that Siegel and Schuster were making on Superman. And Bob wanted to make that money, and Vince Sullivan said, the editor of Detective Comics, he said to Bob on a Friday, if you'd like to make that money, come up with your own superhero. And that's when he made the sketch over the weekend and brought it back in, I believe, to Vince Sullivan on Monday.
The name itself, Batman. Who came up with the name and when? Because when Bob spoke to Vince, he didn't have a character at all yet. And by Monday he had a name. Where'd the name come from?
Bob
But
came up with that name.
all right. According to who?
Bill Finger said, substantiated that, and then Bob also said it, so it's pretty clear that that name was something that he came up with. And as I said before, there are all these characters very similar to that, and one actually called the Batman before that.
I think on the sketch that Kane showed to Finger, the words Batman were already printed on it underneath.
That's that's an important distinction for several reasons. There are a lot of people who speculate, well, maybe Bill had suggested it, or Bill came up with it. Both Bob and Bill say that Bob already had the name. So regardless of whatever other details are in there, it starts off with that name, Bat-Man, with Bob. How many of you have ever seen Bob Kane's original illustration of the Batman? Yeah, odds are you're wrong. An awful lot of people have seen this or some things based on it. That's not Bob's illustration. Where does this come from? Any random member of the panel?
Well, that's the illustration that I did in 1999, and if it wasn't for, I think, Tom's book in 1989, 10 years earlier, Batman and Me, that came out in the wake of the Batman movie, in which he got Bob Kane to actually admit on record the things about the very first sketch that he showed Bill Finger, and admitted that Bill Finger made all of these suggestions. So in 1999, after reading Tom's book, I wanted to try to make that sketch as close to both Bob Kane's and Bill Finger's own words as to what that sketch looked like, and piecing together, in a sense, all the evidence, I came up with that illustration. And the figure itself that I based it on, I figured, the Detective 27, the first Batman cover, has Batman swinging with his knees bent, but I had read in Tom's book that, in another place, that Bob was a notorious swiper of Alex Raymond, like all the young comic artists were, and I ended up saying, okay, if you based it on Flash Gordon, let me see if I can find a figure by Raymond's Flash Gordon, and sure enough, 2 years early in 37, I actually found in one of the strips an Alex Raymond figure, Flash Gordon, swinging on a vine with his knees bent. So Bob Kane actually swiped that figure from Alex Raymond. But the bottom line is, without Bill Finger, even though he was a writer, and as Denny said, he was a very visual writer, he basically art-directed Batman by making all the suggestions, the domino mask, changing the red suit to darker colors, the stiff bat wings to a cape that imitated bat wings, giving him the cowl. He actually went to the dictionary and pulled off the dictionary and looked up the word bat and said to Bob, hey Bob, here's a picture of a bat, make this cowl resemble that more. So without all of those things, basically that would have been Batman without Bill Finger, and that character might have lasted maybe one issue in 1939. So that's how that happened.
Peter Brown did an illustration that we used in a Kickstarter for a Bill Finger tribute of Bob showing this character to Vince Sullivan and then just pointing to the door. What happened? Regarding the aspects of this costume, it's such a classic costume. People looked at the tales. Also the discussion, it sounded like, to some people, Jerry Robinson certainly says, it sounds like they must have been at Bill's place when they had that discussion. Mark, why is that?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was thinking about that when Arlen was talking. This is, I think, a relatively minor point in history to debate, but it's fun to talk about for a minute. The story goes that Bob called Bill and said, can you help me with something? And that Bill went over to Bob's. My feeling when I was researching the book is that it was most likely the other way around, that Bob would have gone over to Bill's because of the dictionary.
Right.
Most of the people that I spoke with who knew Bob personally, and this is just repeating their words, would have described him as not an intellectual. And I figured in the 1930s, post-college years, if either one of them was more likely to have a dictionary, it would be Bill. And when I was speaking with Jerry Robinson, with Jen's dad, I started to go down this path. I said, yeah, about the location. And before I got another sentence out, Jerry said, yeah, I think it was at Bill's. So he was one step ahead of me on that.
By the way, I think it mentioned in one of the reports that he had a Merriam-Webster dictionary. And when I did that illustration, I happened to have my mother's old dictionary, and it was a Merriam-Webster from 1936. And sure enough, I looked up the word bat, and there was an illustration of a bat under the name bat, and chances are that might have been the exact dictionary that Bill Finger pulled off the shelf.
I think there's one thing there on that illustration of the Bill actually created, and that's the utility belt that came from Doc Savage. I don't think Bob was not a big reader or a big pulp reader, and I suspect that that's Bill's invention.
So is that exactly what was sold to Vince that day? This guy with a name and not that costume, but something more like this, and really just had the name of the costume. So what's the defining character? What's the defining character? Qualities that define a character. Who creates any character? Before we even get back to some of these details, that's what we've got for the contract to sign. Who's the creator? Based on that information. And I'll just leave that question here at the moment. We've got a lot of other things here.
But you see, why isn't it any different than Siegel and Schuster? Because Siegel came up with the, in a sense, verbal idea of Superman one night in 1933. And then he runs over, I think, to Joe Shuster's house, right, Brad? And then basically describes to him the idea, and Joe Shuster draws it up. And they both went in with the character, and in a sense created Superman out of that. Basically, Bob Kane was the Jerry Siegel in this role, and Bill Finger was the Joe Shuster. And they co-create Batman together. And unfortunately, because Bob Kane had the lawyer father, and Bill Finger was shy, and Bob Kane went in, and his father made sure that, make sure you sell this and have your name on it. And that's how Bill Finger ended up, I think, getting shunted away from his co-creation.
So they produced the first story. And at this point, as far as we know, Bob Kane is doing all the art, although it involves a lot of swiping and tracing. And an awful lot of the images come from where? I go back to Arlen on these points because he's the one. Arlen has done some incredible work finding some of the things that Bob swiped from. Where did a lot of the images in that first story come from?
Well, to tell you the truth, I think the best resource, Dial B for Blog, by this guy Robbie Reed, that's a pseudonym for Kirk Campbell. But he, I think, was the one that actually discovered the Big Little book from the 1930s. I forget what it was called. Those were these books that were like about this big and this thick, and they were sequential illustrations with text. And, there were so many images in there. Kane traced or swiped or copied right out of this book for the very first Detective Comics story, which, again, the verbal story was based on the Shadow novel, Partners in Peril. So the whole first Batman, Detective 27, is a total kind of put together, swiped bit of work, both verbally and visually.
Right, now, a lot of you know things on Detective 27. What are the important elements of that Detective 27, the very first published story? What else is in there besides just the guy in the bat costume that stayed in the Batman mythos? Any other character in the story who saved the mythos?
Dad dies.
In the first story, Commissioner Gordon's there, and Bruce Wayne, of course. I think those are the only two that.
But see, I don't think because I don't think there is anything memorable in Detective 27. It's almost, well, actually one has more, but it's not until you get to the origin.
Yeah, to get to the origin.
Yeah, but to me, that's bad. The other stuff is great. But it's like, in Batman, he goes to the utility belt and there's smoke. And where's Batman? I feel sometimes that we look for things because we like Batman. But to me, it's that origin. It's the crime. The crime is on the rise in New York at the time, but that's what people really stick with. Because it could be Batman, it could be Owlman, it could be who else, Ferret Boy or something, but it's that origin that really, like Superman's origin, I think, that really made the character stand.
Yeah, once upon a time, might have been possible for me to change the art. DC was in the midst of revamping its whole line, cleaning up the continuity. And I decided not to touch it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's the best origin in comics because in one sentence, you know who the who and the why of the character, and then you can proceed from there. And I think that was originally with Bill Finger.
But also, I think there's also parallels, and Brad, maybe you can speak of this as well, and I know Mark, you know, the idea that both characters lose their parents, number one, although Superman gets adopted parents, but there is a parallel in Batman's parents getting murdered and what happened in Jerry Siegel's life, and Brad, maybe you can speak of this, in losing his father years earlier, and how that might have been used by Finger and Kane in Batman's origin.
Yeah, I'll do it really quick because Mark's the guy to talk to about this. Yeah, I think that was the big. So I just wrote. I wrote a column for the Beat, comicsbeat.com, looking at history of comics, and I looked at crime during the time when they came up with Batman, and I freaked out because I saw that there was a hit-and-run car accident where Augusta Khan was killed. And I said, that's Bob Kane's mother, and the killer, the driver was caught, but no charges were filed, went scot-free. And I said, that's it, that's Batman. Just like Superman, Jerry's father dies, and then becomes the myth, but it wasn't his mom, right? Very tragic for the family, but the name was the same, and there was so much crime going on. I think that the reason that the criminal origin of Batman stuck with people, still sticks with us today. Why Batman is the most popular superhero in America right now is because we live in a world where that's what we think about. But I want Mark to talk about that instead.
Are we jumping the gun on the origin?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so should I hold it?
Well, I'm still on Detective 27.
Okay,
well,
well,
because Nicky has some things related to the very first story and how the characters appeared.
Well, I'm not a Batman expert by any stretch of the imagination at all. My expertise is really with my grandfather and with pulps. A lot of people have been mentioning pulps up here, and I wonder how many people in this audience are very know the term or aware of it. But the pulps were such a huge influence in the early 30s, and they were a real foundation for the comics. My grandfather wrote for the pulps. A lot of these guys that got into comics wrote for the pulps, illustrated for the pulps. So that was very much, Tom talked about those influences. That was a very strong influence here. So I just want to put a plug in for the pulps. I love looking at these old comics, and one of the things that I think is so sad is that a lot of these have not been reproduced, so you guys don't have as much access to them as so many of the other things that have come out now. How does this work?
You just slide it under here.
Oh.
But I have to switch this.
Oh.
Yeah, and do it right away. There it is.
Oh, okay. This is from, I'll just do it this way so you can see it. This is from More Fun.
The microphone, speak into the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is from More Fun, 1936. Is that what it says? I can't read it.
37.
Oh, no, 38. Sorry. So this is a very early comics, and this is Dr. Occult, the Ghost Detective, and it's by Leger and Roots, Siegel and Schuster.
and it's called Vampire Venom. And if you'll notice these creatures right here, they are called, let's see if I can read this.
Okay, switch glasses. Old people in glasses.
Sorry about that. A sensation of sheer terror clutches Ellsworth, Whitney, as he glimpses the scene indicated by occult, where a moment before there had been empty space. Now at the side of the newly made grave stand the figure of the corpse and a Batman.
And look at the cape. What's that cape look like? I see some scallops there.
I just thought that was a fascinating discovery. I have no idea how it fits. These guys are the experts. They'll tell you. But I just thought it's nice to see a visual here of something really interesting from the past that we are all interested in.
I think a funny thing on this page is that car.
Oh, yeah.
You know what the deal is on this car? Do you still need projectors?
No.
Okay. All right. If I can.
I had, the other thing I'll just add about that, I had that in my book. The editor of that was Sullivan. And Kane started working on that exact comic the month after. So he most certainly was aware of it. So Sullivan might have been key to that too.
I just noticed the car that was on that page kind of resembles this car. And even more so the way this car was drawn back in Detective 27. This is the original Batmobile, or versions of this were the original Batmobile.
What issue is that one from?
I don't remember. the one where I could find that picture quickest on the internet. Anyway, I've got plenty of experts who ought to know an answer on one like that. This is one of the really good views of it. Although, also, back to Detective 27 on this car, though. There is if you read, it would be beautiful to be able to read Detective 27 without knowing, who's going to walk out on that last panel and reveal, he was Batman? This friend of Gordon's that he was telling all this stuff to for no apparent reason? There is one clue to Batman's identity before that, though. It's the car. They go over in, Gordon and Wayne go to the crime scene. He takes his buddy to the crime scene in this car that looks just like the one Batman's riding around in the rest of the story. Okay. I contemplated letting them just go on with the origins. I don't want to interrupt. They're saying great stuff here. All right. You had something you wanted to say the origin, Mark.
The origin. Well,
because this origin is, the character itself is important for many reasons. The origin is primal. It taps our greatest fears. It taps, your parents can and will die someday. It reflects all the greatest fears in anybody's life. So, however they came up with this, Bob says, Bill and I decided there couldn't be anything more dramatic. Wherever this came from, it is a powerful origin, which they brought up for good reasons. Now we can get back to it, please.
Okay. Well, it's important to look at the origin in historical context. When this origin debuted, it was the first time that a comic book character had a psychological reason for doing what he was doing. Before this, there weren't that many, but there were enough, including the comic strips, of characters who were doing good for good's sake, very two-dimensional. Batman was the first character who had a motive, and that, of course, makes him more believable, adds more texture to the situation. And Bill Finger was a very self-educated man. He was an avid reader. He was also an avid foreign film buff. And as Gerard Jones said in Men of Tomorrow, it was a very novelistic approach to give a character in a comic book an origin like that. And it's so commonly said that people relate to Batman because he has no powers. Well, I say that we relate to Batman because he has no parents. And not just that, unlike Superman, he saw them die. That's, you can't compare grief, right? You can't compare what someone is devastated by, but that's certainly, there's few things that are more traumatic than that. So we all, as kids, most of us, I'm sure, first began reading Batman, I remember thinking, yeah, he has no power, so maybe one day I could be him, but, then I took a look at myself and said, probably not. But what I did say is, God, what if my parents don't come pick me up? Or, what if I go away and never come back. That fear of losing your parents and what that would do to you. I remember that really vividly as a kid.
As you guys go through this, can you say who drew these various panels you're putting up? Because it kind of puts it into context, if that's possible. Yeah.
The Superman issue, it's Superman title. Superman did not know his parents. He did not know the birth parents. He did not know that he was an orphan. This is not as much of a tantrum as it sounds like. He didn't know it for about 10 years or so. And anybody on the panel know who wrote the story in which he found out where he came from?
Bill Finger. Bill Finger.
Bill Finger wrote the story in which Superman found out where he came from.
I have a little bit of something to add to the origin. Doc Savage, in the first Doc Savage novel, Man of Bronze, Doc Savage's father is killed. He loses his father, and he tracks down the murderer, and that's how he. It's a Mayan civilization, secret civilization, and he then finances his adventures through tracking his father's murderer down and getting the Mayans then supply money for him to carry out his mission. The other thing is, speaking of Bill's psychology, I think Alvin Schwartz came up with this, which is that Bill's parents were really oppressive towards him and took his money as soon as he got it, and so there may be a sort of hidden hatred or anger towards the parent here and wishing to sort of do away with them, at the same time fearing of their loss. So it's a real ambivalent situation. So I think that these personal motives, as well as the genre formulas and cultural ethos, sort of go together to some extent to create these sorts of origins.
Thank you.
Well, also, I think you have to think about the period. Some of you know Danny Finger. He's been doing some wonderful panels about 1939 and Batman this year. And he brought up some very interesting facts about what was happening in 1939. And if you think about everything that was going on then, and you think about the loss of the parent, and the sense of discomfort and fear that was in the zeitgeist, if you wish, the collective unconscious, then it seems natural that a character like this would appear at that time to reflect all of these things, because all of these, what's so wonderful about the comics, in my opinion, is that there are these wonderful archetypal forces that flow through all of us and that are reflected in these wonderful characters and these wonderful stories. And the creators, it is a collaborative effort, and sometimes people did not get the credit they deserve. Believe me, I know about that. And it's just really great the way these wonderful, artistic, brilliant, talented people put together these ideas in such a great way.
I'd also like to point out that in lieu of what you just said about the late 30s and the rise of fascism and Nazism in Europe, I do a lecture on Jews and comics, and it's all about how all of these original creations in the late 30s by these, young Jewish creators are acting subconsciously or unconsciously out of this sort of primal Jewish need to create a hero to come and save us. And that goes back as far back as you want to go. It goes back to Jesus Christ, it goes back to the biblical heroes, it goes back to the golem myth, in which, the rabbi from Prague creates this figure, the golem, to save the Jews from the ghetto. So in the late 30s, you have this rise of all these superheroes, mostly created by young Jewish creators. So there is a sort of zeitgeist mythological reason for the need to create these heroes to come save us.
Tom touched on something that actually makes me want to put a question back to the theme. What do we know about Bill Finger's relationship with his family from back then? or you know, throughout his life? What was his relationship like with his parents and his other relatives?
Or something like that. And that's not what he wanted to do. So he had to sever his ties with his family.
And Mark, did you
Well,
run into someone?
Yeah, I did. When I started researching Bill in 2006, I thought that I was led to believe that he was an only child, because there was a one-page biography of Bill in Green Lantern #1, which you can see on my blog and other sites too, and it said that it refers to him as his parents' only son. So that colored my thinking for a while, and then I finally realized that it didn't say only child, and it turns out that he had at least 2 sisters, and I say at least because I found one who's still alive. She's over 90. Her name's Emily, and when I called her, she wanted nothing to do with this. And she told me that she had been estranged from Bill. She might have said that Bill had been estranged from her since before she got married. And I said, when was that? And she said the late 1930s. So she really had almost no knowledge of his role in Batman. And then there was a second sister that turned up when the 1940 census was released this past year, and her name's Gilda. So if anybody knows her, if you want to know about it, maybe she'll talk. I haven't found her yet.
Brad, you've touched on some of the events that might have influenced the origin. You've done some additional research on some of the other things that were going on at that time that might have shaped the story of that origin.
I think I already touched. I don't want to take too much of other people's time, but just that there was just a ton of crime at the time. It was averaging. The New York Times was printing tables of how much murder was going on, and at the time they created Batman, it was averaging 2 murders a day, and it was really grisly. It was during the day. It was bystanders were being killed, children were being killed, and there's all these reports of the police chief would put something in the paper, and we are going to fight back, and it's like the Untouchables. It's like he says, they draw their guns, we will draw ours. So they come with knives, we will be ready. So there's this real spirit of the vigilante, which I think is this. I think that's what speaks to us about Batman. I think all the other stuff is so awesome. The gadgets, the gizmos, the cars, the ears, short ears, sorry, Jim. It's that you want to fight back. You know, even the Bat Kid, remember last summer, fighting cancer, they do that great thing in San Francisco. You know, why is he there? He loves Batman too, but he wants to, he wants to fight back.
But also, Batman has no superpowers, obviously. I love how when he's called a superhero, I think the appeal of Batman in a very primal state is that all of us, if we devoted our lives to training ourselves physically and mentally to perfection, we can become our own heroes. And I think that's a very sort of, it's the Horatio Alger myth, but Bruce Wayne doesn't go from rags to riches. He's rich to begin with. But other than that, Batman does represent the kind of great American dream of you can become a, quote, superhero on your own. And that, I think, is a very primal element that speaks to all of us.
1 year in, some changes get made. There's a kid and a clown who come along. Why did these changes happen? We're running low on time. Why did these changes happen, and who decided to make these changes? Whose ideas were these? The kid and the clown. I see somebody who shares a last name with somebody who had a lot to do with them. Maybe we'll put it on you. Where'd the kid and the clown come from?
Well, I'll let the scholars speak to this, but what I do know that my dad was there, and he was an active participant, and he wanted to. There was a need for. He felt the need for a villain that could challenge Batman. He felt the need for a someone who would transcend, who was villainous, but who could transcend the petty street toughs and crooks. And so he dreamed up the concept of the Joker, drew the first sketch in the playing card form. He played bridge as a kid, and his family was card players. I think Bob Kane swiped that story from my dad's own story. But so they needed a story to fill Batman 1. All of a sudden, the book is much larger. There's the Detective Comics title, and there's the Batman title. So there's a deadline. He came up with the story, and he was heartbroken when the publisher decided that Bill Finger should write that story. But he was happy that it was in great hands. And so that was the Joker. And then a little bit later, he didn't come up with the concept of Robin, but he was the first to draw him and design the costume and named Robin. The original names that were bandied about were Mercury and others. And my dad designed the look of Robin based on the N.C. Wyeth illustrations of Robin Hood, and that's where the name came as well. Not as some might think naively, Robin's son, but from Robin Hood.
Yeah. Bill wanted somebody for Batman to talk to. Bob said, let's make it a kid, but the name and the costume come from Jerry. There are a lot of people who think Jerry deserves the greater proportion for actually creating the product, the character that filled the order the other guys had in mind. You got something, Mark?
You said it.
Oh, okay.
Well, can I also point out that since Batman is this great detective, and one of the big influences along with the Shadow, as Denny mentioned, was Sherlock Holmes. So the two main characters here, the Joker and Robin, are both really influenced by Sherlock Holmes, because I read somewhere that Jerry said Sherlock Holmes had his Moriarty, and that basically Batman needed his Moriarty, and that becomes the Joker. And Sherlock Holmes had his Watson, somebody to talk to, and that became Robin. But I think those two characters, so central to the Batman mythos, are really like a Rashomon type of origin, where I think all three creators, Batman, Bill Finger, and Jerry Robinson, all have their versions of the creation of the Joker and Robin. And I think we've sort of come to the belief, I mean, don't we all now agree that both of those characters are really co-creations of all three men? Because like I said, the Joker, Bill Finger talks about bringing in the photograph of Conrad Veidt from the silent film The Man Who Laughs. I think Jerry Robinson has the playing card, and Bob Kane had his version of, I think, whatever, his Joker. And I think Robin, all three of them have their input on Robin as well. And I think recently, once again, on Dial B for Blog, there is, once again, from Flash Gordon, Alex Raymond, there is an image of Dale going to a costume party with Flash Gordon, and she's dressed in what looks like Robin's outfit. The red and green and the vest and the shorts, and since we all know that everybody was reading Flash Gordon, that's another Exhibit A piece of evidence. It's so close to Robin, you just can't deny that might have, because we've heard the N.C. Wyeth story, you look at Robin in the Errol Flynn movie, you look at, he looks a little bit like Robin, so there really is so many influences. I think it's hard to pinpoint, one man or one thing. It's really, right, multiple influences.
And another interesting thing which shows you the influence of the Bat Whispers is the origin of the Joker is taken directly from the Bat Whispers. So that's...
You mean threatening to kill everybody in the closed room?
In the closed room, it strikes 12, leaving to note the whole thing. So that shows you that they actually did set up things very important to them.
So, as a reminder, why do we care? Bob and Bill are long gone. It's been 75 years since the stories originally happened, and Bill's been gone for 40 years. Died a few weeks short of his 60th birthday, and then Bob passed later. Why do we care? We do care. I'm asking, why is it that we get so much?
Truth, justice, and the American way, and the word truth is first. We should care about the truth. If anything, the superheroes in these comics taught us is to stand up for these ideals, and how bitterly ironic that, Siegel and Schuster and Jack Kirby and Bill Finger and all of these running themes all have to deal with what was the truth behind the creation, and the fact that, that is our job if we care about these things, to stand up for the truth or discover or find the truth as best as we can research it.
Well, I think it also speaks to the fact that we as individuals want to know who created these things, because it is an individual creative act that then becomes collaborative. And it matters to us who did it, I think. And I agree that it's a collaborative.
That was actually on one. And fast, if any of you had just one question, burning question you'd love to ask Bob or Bill, do you know what it would be?
Yeah.
What would it be, Nikki?
Did you talk to my grandfather about this?
All right. Okay, we have a camera inside. Michael Uslan, yesterday, he was with us for the Bill Finger tribute. And he said the one thing he wished he could have seen that we didn't get to do there was something that Bill Finger never received in his life. We have a representative over here. And we would love to share our feelings about Mr. Bill Finger. Would we mind giving a hand for Mr. Bill Finger? And standing up. Thank you all for joining us. I wish we had 90 minutes, because this would have been where we would have gone to questions. But thank you all very much